what's happening with sustainability, what's happening with climate change, what's happening with global warming, and for God's sakes, what on earth was the United States thinking? And the short answer to all of this is there is a revolution in sustainability and increasingly something called resource efficiency, which is how do we reduce our carbon footprint in every aspect of our lives. And it is not slowing down. It is going more quickly. It's growing more quickly in every corner of the planet. And California is continuing to lead. So what I'm going to talk about today, and I'm going to give you a quick world tour with touchdowns in China and India and Silicon Valley and a quick one at West Reno, and then we're going to throw it up into questions. So I'm going to give you a quick overview. I want this to be as provocative as possible. I'm going to leave as much time for you to weigh in. Feel free to raise your hand anytime you want. Then I'm going to bring up a group of panelists, interestingly, all three of whom I've known for an extended period of time, who are good friends, who are on the cutting edge of changing the world we live in. And remember, it's all happening out of Silicon Valley. So with that, let me tell you a quick story. I actually am the rare person who grew up in Silicon Valley. And when we moved here, folks, there was nothing here. It's Stanford, Hewlett-Packard, and a lot of fruit trees. And that was Silicon Valley. What I can tell you is that every year, pollution in the state of California grew worse and worse. The most polluted cities in the United States were here. It got worse all the time. Your eyes stung. If you went to LA in the 70s, it was brown. And then one thing happened that began to change everything. Who knows what it was? Raise your hand or yell it out.
Clean Air Act.
Clean Air Act was part of it, but something more dramatic in California.
The imposition of the mileage standards for cars.
The requirement to put catalytic converters in every vehicle. And just ponder this. 50 states, one of them raises their hand and says, Detroit, you must make completely different cars because our legislature went and did something crazy. In 1974, it was viewed as nuts. Within a decade, virtually every other state had followed suit, countries around the world. And for the next, get this, 4 decades, the air in this state got cleaner every year until the early 2000s. And then there was another dramatic shift. Who knows what that is?
The energy crisis.
You're on a roll, sir. No. Electric vehicles? No. That's still weighing in. .com boom? No. Think globally. The rise of China, of Asia. So at precisely the time the U.S. is turning off its coal plants, China, and we'd been putting on roughly 1 or 2 new coal plants in this country a year for essentially 50 years. China is building and launching 1 or 2 coal plants per week. Per week. So for the first time in 40 years, the amount of pollution over the West Coast starts going up dramatically. The Environmental Protection Agency tells us 25% of the pollution on the West Coast today comes from Asia. And it's not slowing down anytime soon. I recently spoke at the Googleplex in Beijing. And on that very day, the China South Daily News printed the statistic that by merely being born in Beijing, living there, in a given day was the equivalent of smoking 52 cigarettes. So you are born with a 2.5 pack a day smoking habit, if you're lucky enough to be born in Beijing. That triggered this, which stimulated a major global shift, the biggest one in human history, towards sustainability, massive movement towards solar, wind. Last year, China put on 77 gigawatts of solar in 1 year, double the amount of the previous year. The U.S., in contrast, no piker, 40 gigawatts of energy, also double the year before. The world is moving in this direction, and there is no stopping us. The picture I want to give you is this: coal, oil, gas. Folks, regardless of what you might hear tweeted out of certain houses in Washington, there is no turning back. And we've already made effectively a huge shift from coal and oil and gas to solar, PV, wind. But what I really want to talk about is how quickly we're moving to the next step. But really quickly, does anybody want to just fathom a quick guess? Not just in California, but globally, not just in these liberal states, globally, what percentage of the new power that goes online, Africa, India, China, Europe, what percent of all new power that goes online for utilities globally is renewable? Or rather, when will the majority of the power that goes online be renewable? Anybody have a guess when we get to that inflection point?
5 years from now?
5 years, good guess. Anybody else? 10 years, 11? It happened 4 years ago. So you've got people in Washington, maybe elected people in Washington, saying, oh my God, it's not going to happen. You know, we're going to be, these are teeny things, job killers. Folks, it happened 4 years ago. And it is continuing. Look at the trend line of where things are going, and this is globally. And they're doing it for a single reason. It's not to be good citizens. It's not particularly to be green. It's because the cost of renewables is inexorably going down. The cost of carbon fuels goes up sometimes, down sometimes, hard to predict, dirty. It is receding in the rearview mirror. This top chart, which you can barely see, and this is 2015, shows the cost of solar getting near parity. Today in 17, the cost of solar is below the cost not only of coal, but in more and more of the world, it is below the cost of natural gas. There is no turning back. That is the economic fact. The more interesting part is the chart below. And we're going to have Diarmuid O'Connell here, I hope, shortly from Tesla, former colleague. Inexorably, the cost of lithium-ion batteries, power storage, has been going down 7 to 9% a year. This is the missing piece. This is what drives the cost of electric vehicles, but just, if not more importantly, this is what provides power storage for utilities. Because you can have all the solar and wind in the world, but unless you have some baseline storage, you don't have a complete electrical system. This is what people have been waiting for. I promise you, just as most of you know, that the cost of a barrel of oil is roughly $50 a gallon, in the future, you will all know what the cost per kilowatt hour is of power storage. Most of my life was $2,000 a kilowatt hour. And that meant no matter how you felt about electric cars, they frankly didn't make a heck of a lot of sense. It came down to about $1,000 a kilowatt hour slowly. But you can see what's happened as you get out to 2015. It has really come down. And then last year happened. What drove this? Why the sudden dip? Anybody know? Capacity. This is the laws of economics. Ironically, the first business person president we have is not quite up to date on these things. This is changing everything. Notice the slope of the curve. As this comes down, and it's being driven by Mr. Musk, putting the Tesla Gigafactory online, which is producing batteries today, the first or second largest building in the world. You all know more or less how big a Costco is, right? Gigafactory, it is the size of 100 Costcos next to each other. The building is 1.5 miles long. When you put this much capacity online, and the people at LG Chem in Korea, Panasonic are not asleep at the wheel. They're doubling, tripling their capacity as well. Costs go down. What does this mean? It means you're going to see a global move toward electric vehicles. It's going far faster, I believe, than what Sid suggested. And let me give you this graph. This is the forecast on how quickly electric cars are coming, but this data is based on the cost of batteries last year. And I just showed you that after coming down 8 or 9% a year predictably for a decade, they've suddenly dropped 25% with more capacity going online. This changes everything. You're going to see more electric vehicles the rest of your life than you dreamed. Prime Minister Modi in India just decreed in 15 years, we will only be selling electric cars in India because their pollution problems are about to exceed what's going on in China. So let me pivot. Make no mistake, the world is moving inexorably towards sustainable energy. We are leading the charge, along with China, who, by the way, amongst other things, had the boldness to stand up and decree they would build or plant 100,000 square miles of trees to begin to deal with pulling the carbon we've already put in the atmosphere out. They get it. Our job is to make sure we get it. I want to pivot. What comes next? Because the next chapter, I want to suggest to you, is even more exciting than the last one. And that is this move to reduce our carbon footprint on every part of our life. It's driven by three things: the new ethos, new technologies, and the new customers. The new ethos, simply put, from Steve Jobs, born right here of Syrian ancestry, I think you probably know. And he said, if you don't cannibalize yourself, somebody else will. And I will tell you, every industry on the planet is being cannibalized. The firms that don't think they have a problem, Kodak, Xerox, you've heard of them, they're gone before you know it. And the rate of change is happening faster than ever. It's the firms like Microsoft that understand how to reinvent themselves are the ones that come back better than ever. But there's also new technologies, things that are literally changing everything. Internet of Things, big data, sharing economy. I'm going to say a word about each of these. The Internet of Things, ponder this. When they developed the first telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, it's exciting. They call from one room to the other, but how big a deal is it when there's only 2 telephones in the world? The Internet is a big deal because you have literally billions of people connected. But with the Internet of Things, we're talking about tens of billions of things, every aspect of your life, your car, your office, your home, all connected through a smartphone. It is changing everything. It's going to make your life more efficient. We're going to need to pay attention to some new issues like endpoint cybersecurity, like privacy, etc. But this will reduce carbon outputs for the planet. What's interesting to me is the rapidity with which the biggest companies in the world are moving into our homes. For the last 100 years, there's only one company or industry that really got to go home with you, your utility. They're in the house. They kind of know what you're doing, at least in terms of energy use. But our biggest companies are not only going in your home, they're going in your bedroom, and they're listening. This is big stuff, and it's going to change a lot. Big data, maybe even more of a profound change. It will affect every aspect of your life. It will help us dramatically reduce our carbon footprint. My favorite example is driverless cars. As you know, living here, you see them on the road today. You tell this to people on the East Coast, Europe, they think you have lost your senses. It is here now. The former head of Ford Motors said in 48 months, they will be selling cars commercially through their dealerships without steering wheels, brakes, or accelerators. You're a little worried about where the car's going. You want to leap in front. There's nothing to grab. And it's essentially here now. Silicon Valley is just waiting for the regulatory issues to be worked out. This is what they look like. The car on the top is Zoox. It's across the street from our office on Sand Hill. It is dramatic what is happening. By the way, the Zoox car will go forwards and backwards just as easily. There's no reason cars need to have just one windshield in the front. That's all going away, and they will be safer as well. The big question I might add is you see all of the major auto companies moving into this area. Make no mistake, everybody is doing it. The big question, we can come back to this later, is who will own the cars of the future? I would suggest to you it may not be individuals. Sharing economy. It is hard to overstate the impact this is having. And my favorite example is Airbnb. When I was a kid, if your parents had done okay and life was good, you might get to go on a road trip and maybe stay in a Hilton hotel. It was big. And why not? They've got these things in 2,300 cities around the world. It was the sign of American kind of dominance. And yet today, an 8-year-old company, Airbnb, has their lodging, not in 2,300 cities, but in over 30,000. They're not letting out 700,000 rooms a night. They're letting out close to 2 million rooms a night, and they're doubling every 2 years. And the cost of goods, well, close to zero. This is how entire industries are being disrupted. It's dramatically reducing the carbon footprint for the planet. It's changing industries as we know them, and it's happening in every sector of the economy. Lastly, we have a new customer. For the last 50 years, baby boomers have dictated what the global economy and, frankly, global politics looks like. In the ethos, it's all been about who can buy the biggest TV and the biggest car and the biggest house. And then you throw it out in 3 years and buy a bigger one. It's colossal waste, consumerism at its worst, and it's all changing as we move to the millennial customer who essentially wants 3 things. 1, smaller carbon footprint in everything they do. Number 2, complete connectivity on every part of their life. Work, home, car, all dictated by your cell phone. And 3rd, cleaner air, food, and water. And we see these trend lines in every corner of the planet for the first time. Consumers in Shenzhen, China, look largely like consumers in Mexico City, Palo Alto, or Berlin. So it's a new world, new technology, moving faster than ever. And people say, oh my God, if this is happening, Steve, who's going to make any money here? Why isn't someone making money? Folks, you've been asleep. We're seeing not just unicorns, but increasingly firms valued at tens of billions of dollars. Mobileye just last month at $15 billion. And why not? The company was already 6 years old. That's stunning. Just one quick thing to a case study, which I'll do in a minute, to give you a sense of how quick this is happening. 1996, the EV won. It's revolutionary, but folks, the car stinks. In all deference to the movie Who Killed the Electric Car, it was a crappy product. 0 to 60 in 11 seconds. It is no surprise that GM discontinued it. It's too bad they crushed all the cars and put them in the dump, but it wasn't a great product. Fast forward just 16 years, Tesla comes out with a car that does 0 to 60 in 4 seconds, safest car ever tested by the National Highway and Transportation Society, highest or administration, highest consumer report listings. It changes everything. And that is just 5 years ago. Last year, in March, Tesla comes out with the Model 3. You can't actually see one. You can't buy one. It's just a storyline. You can put down money, and they take 400,000 orders. Biggest selling model in the U.S. is usually Toyota Corolla or Honda Accord. They sell about 265,000 units. Biggest brand names, biggest distributorships. Everybody knows them. Tesla comes out with a product you can't even buy, and they take 400,000 orders in 2 weeks. This should tell you something about the rapidity of change. I was just in Europe last week, and people are saying, we're not going to have electric cars for decades. People in Norway and Holland know better, but it's coming fast. And on the right, the first fully autonomous vehicles on the road next year by Mercedes. So get ready, change is coming quickly. And it's all being tied together. You all know what this is? The Gigafactory. You will see power storage in your home. Your utilities will be benefiting from it. You will see two-way power grid. It is a whole new world, and we're inventing it right here. California, even on the cover of Time magazine, why California is still America and the world's future. We're not slowing down. We're going faster. Thank you. We're going to take 2 or 3 questions, go right into the panel. Anybody want to challenge anything, add their 2 cents, be provocative? Come on in and sit down for the folks who just came in. Who's got a question? Sir?
For IoT, you mentioned endpoint security. Is that hardware security, or what is that?
It's cybersecurity. So for most of our lives, think about cybersecurity in two pots. Either your job is to protect the Pentagon or Target or the California DMV or the Democratic National Committee. They didn't do so well. But if you buy enough money, you can put it on big iron, lots of mainframes, and protect the enterprise. But the bigger challenge is what's called endpoint security, because there are all these endpoints now. Your laptop, my phone, Citibank has 18,000 ATMs, every airline has tens of thousands of kiosks, your cars. It's hard to get software security that will reside on a small kernel or CPU to protect you. This will be one of the fastest growing areas in the world, and everybody should be giving some thought. One or two more quick questions?
Hi, thank you. Very interesting presentation. You mentioned the cost of battery storage per kilowatt hour. In your graph, you had 2017, it looked around $100 per kilowatt hour. Then on the
Maybe
other chart, it was a little
150 and
different.
going down.
Okay. Where did you get those numbers for 2017, just out of curiosity?
You can Google a lot of this. I would have to go back and check the source, but if you give me your card, I can email it to you. We've got sources on almost all the slides, and if anybody would like a copy of the presentation, give me your card and just put send presentation, and it shall be yours. It's free. It's the new economy. Gentlemen in the back, these two folks, then we're going to get on to the, maybe one other onto the panel. Sir, you first.
I think you mentioned that IoT and the sharing economy would both help with the carbon footprint. I wasn't quite clear on the connection between how that would help.
So what's happening is you have devices that can help manage your energy output more efficiently than before. The whole thrust of this is, in our lives, you come into work and you turn the light on and it's on 100% all day. Now, at night that makes sense. First thing in the morning it makes sense. Having your lights on 100% at noon, it's crazy. Our kids will understand that lights will automatically go up and down based on the time of day. When you leave the room, they'll go off. Everything will have sensors in it and will be controllable as you wish. So the IoT has dramatic impacts on things like that. It will also alter and make it enable you to drive vehicles more efficiently. In the remaining few years, we are driving at all. By the way, I joke about this, but you have to understand, there's data on all of this. And will people say, oh, it's crazy and I don't want to get in a car that someone else, that a computer might be driving, not as if every plane you get into today is not already driven by a computer. It is. But once the data comes out that self-driving vehicles are roughly 70-80% safer, it's going to be very hard to make the case that people should be driving for an extended period of time, more than a decade or two. Let's go to this gentleman here, and I'll be brief, and then I know the panel is extraordinary. Sir.
Thank you. I've read that the largest employer of men in the U.S. is driving someone.
Yes.
Can you deal with the economic impacts of the employment factor of self-driving vehicles?
So the question is, largest employment sector is driving, transportation, delivery, everything from delivering pizzas to UPS to DHL. You're dead on right. 3.6 million people in the United States. These people will largely be out of work. The fundamental question in government today is, how do you retrain people to be job worthy in the 21st century? Our candidates, frankly, in both parties, are not doing a great job of addressing that. But those are the big issues. Expect to see a lot of discussion about micro degrees, retraining people later in their careers. I know Luther Jackson of Nova here is literally one of the national experts in this area. Luther, raise your hand. If you want to hear more about that, this is the guy. Last question, and then we're going to bring the panel up. Sir.
What's the future of the nuclear power?
Future of nuclear power. I don't mean this to be political, but I will tell you flat out, the percentage of nuclear power will decrease. It's going to decrease largely for three reasons. One, it's just a more expensive alternative. Forget whether you're Republican or Democrat or live in the U.S., it's just more expensive. Number two, most countries are democracies, and most people don't want nuclear power in their backyard for a host of reasons having to do with 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, Chernobyl, the list goes on. And third, we still have not done a great job of figuring out what to do with the spent materials. So there's always discussion, about small nuclear reactors, more cost-efficient things, it's years out. I served on Secretary of Energy's National Advisory Board, and part of the joke was a lot of these things were 10 years out, 30 years ago, and they're still 10 years out. So if we can get a handle and solve those three problems, it could be interesting, but I will tell you right now, other technologies are way further down the cost curve, are much more popular without the issue of cleanup. And one of the things that we never did a very good job of is we would compare the cost of solar with the cost of coal, and no one would talk about what the down-the-road cost would be of the 18,000 people a year that die in the U.S. from lung-related diseases, or the 83 million people in China that are predicted to die in the next 25 years. Because of big data, we're able to do a more full calculation. On that positive note, let me bring up the three panelists. Marianne Wu from GE, Gil Friend, come on up. And is Dermot here? Oh my God, are we lucky today.